Hey everybody, it's week 2. Welcome to week 2 of our fiction class. It was good to get to know everybody a little bit last week. We are driving forward this week, and I just want to go over our week together. One of the very first links that you will be opening this week, and I'll just take a look at what we called it this week, which is Let's Continue Thinking About Apollo by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And let's think about Apollo for just a second. So you could pop this link open to the one that I just read the title of, and I will read it again really quickly. Do Monday, Let's Continue Thinking About Apollo. Now, it's not my intention to do a full-on psycho lecture, but I hope everybody liked Apollo. I've loved that story since the moment that it totally perplexed my brain. I hope that it perplexed your brain. This is what good fiction should do to us. It should give us pause. It should be like, why'd they do that? This should be the refrain as you're like, why? It should be totally incomprehensible verbalizations that you make while you're struggling. We wrestle with fiction. We really do. Now, of course, a lot of fiction goes down easily. In my last video, I pointed out all of my Bukowski, which I don't teach in this class because gross, but that's what went down easily for me back when I was a young one. Today, you have read Apollo by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I wanted to bring up for us some topics to think about. And if you'll notice, we have the Do Monday, Let's Continue Thinking About Apollo by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And as that comes up for me, you'll see at the top, you can bring this document up simply by bringing forward your Moodle section for week 2. How does reading Apollo by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie help us move toward keener understanding of our first of the course outcomes? Analyze stories using the major elements of literary fiction: plot, characterization, conflict, setting, point of view, irony, and symbolism. And just to say, we have an entire term to cover all of this, so we're not going to be hitting every single idea in the outcomes immediately. So we can just sort of relax, and we can also just enjoy the story. There's so much in this story, and I have to tell you that I wish I could just ask for hands. I'd like to ask, this is the question. You raise your hand. Raise your hand when I ask this next question. How many people in the class got to the end of that story and went, what? And then they just immediately went to the beginning of that story and started reading it again. And happily, we've all read this story, so we know, the spoiler of it, that the irony in this story, the terrible irony in that story, is, of course, that our narrator, and you will forgive me, I'm going to just get right to the end of this story here. And our narrator, Okinwa, says, Raphael pushed me. What? My parents said it at the same time in English. What? Now this next voice that we hear in the very last paragraph, there was time. There was time. Gosh. 3-word sentence. There was time. There was time. And I know you're probably going like, oh my gosh, my idiot fiction teacher's just sitting here saying there was time. And you should be, because you probably, many of you may not, have flipped right back to the beginning to understand the rich irony of that. Not only the irony of how close Raphael and Okenwa were, but that's the irony, right? But we know what happens to Raphael, and we likely forgot on a first reading. We likely forgot. We likely got so thrown into that flashback that we just floating along. They were saying, what's with the kung fu and the nunchucks and the what? And the what? The symbolism of the what? I'm going to let you think about that. I'm not going to, do a lot of thinking about that for you. But there is definitely some symbolism in this story. There was a time before my father turned to Raphael, and before my mother lunged at him as if to slap him, and before she told him to go pack his things and leave immediately, there was time. Check it out. Not only am I repeating that there was time, but Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie repeats it too. There was time. There was time to fix this. Could have fixed it. There was time, but there was no spine. There was no spine. And if you're looking at this and going like, why is Risley suddenly saying there was time, but there was no spine? That's fine. Don't know the answer to that. Please, I hope a few of you won't. Some smarty pants is in here like, okay, go on. That's boring. I might be revealing nothing to a few people that have just swallowed this thing and get it, and they understand the fullness of all of its context and textuality. But there are going to be some people here who, when I say there was time but there was no spine, may not know what that means. And you should. And by the end of this course, you're going to be able to read fiction and really understand what I mean by that. And I hope, and I'll just say it so you're not sitting there going like, wait a second. The narrator is too spineless to take responsibility for his deceit, his deception. Raphael didn't push him. I could have spoken. I could have cut into that silence. I could have said that it was an accident. I could have taken back my lie and left my parents merely to wonder. And of course, they'd be wondering about everything. And the spinelessness is not just that he doesn't... Anyway, it's too complicated. It's too complicated, the things that he's unable to share, the culture in which he exists. But let's just go right back to the beginning of the story. You can just scroll up. I popped over to the forum so I could take a look at it again. And it's multiple paragraphs down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs down. During a visit in November, my parents talked about the increase in armed robberies all over the East. Thieves, too, had to prepare for Christmas. My mother told me how a vigilante mob in Onitsha had caught some thieves, beaten them, and torn off their clothes, how old tires had been thrown over their heads like necklaces, amid shouts for petrol and matches. Before the police arrived, fired shots in the air to disperse the crowd and took the robbers away. My mother paused, and I waited for a supernatural detail that would embellish the story. This is kind of a sleight of hand that the author is using, because you've already set up this whole supernatural. It's almost like for me anyway, it's just sort of adding another layer here to this moment that the writer hasn't gotten to yet, but that notion of supernatural detail relates directly to that moment, because what's the effect of that on both of their lives? Supernatural detail that would embellish the story. Perhaps just as they arrived at the police station, the thieves had turned into vultures and flown away. Do you know, she continued, one of the armed robbers. In fact, the ringleader was Raphael. He was our houseboy years ago. I don't think you'll remember him. And of course, that's more irony, right? She had no idea how close they are. So that's just sort of, some of what you will be thinking about this week. as we, consider fiction, I am going to, sorry to, I'm going to have to go back to the other document, which is here in the Let's Continue Thinking About Apollo. Oh, that was the other question that I just wanted to ask, which was, let's do continue thinking about it. I mean, based on this, and I hope that, you may want to click pause. If anything that I've said now is like you're scratching your head, you may want to stop and read that story twice. And very often we have to read that story twice. And I know that you've already engaged in some of the conversations in the forums about that story. But the first week was pretty low stakes in terms of grades. This week we will be having grades associated with our work in the forums. So it's a bit of a heavier week. And to be honest, was Apollo? I don't remember what the scores were. It's not huge. Okay. But in this document, we're going to be talking about plot. When does the action begin? Why use the flashback? What are the conflicts in the story? So all story is based around conflict. When I was a little kid, I wanted to write. I'd written a great deal, but I wanted to write, and I remember being like 5 years old. Sorry to digress, but I guess we are doing a bit of a bizarre lecture here. So just hang in there, though, because this is. And I asked myself, why is it that there are no stories about rocks? Now, of course, I'm probably wrong about that. For one, I was only 5, and bear in mind it was only 1970 when I was 5. So probably since then there are stories about rocks, and of course, geologists will tell us that there are lots of stories about rocks. So there are really a ton of stories about rocks. But to my conception as a little kid, I remember trying to think of, because I was thinking about stories all the time. I tried to think of a story about a rock, and then I realized, well, a rock's just sitting there. And it doesn't do anything. And this is pretty much its plot. So there's no plot associated with a rock. And of course, plot can be boring. So what fiction writers do is they introduce conflict. And there's so many kinds of conflict in fiction. And in this piece, particularly, we could just start to list them. And were we together, we would write them up on the board. But, there's societal conflict. There's conflict between the things that we aspire towards, or the things that we want, and our ability to achieve them. There's conflicts about who we are versus our culture. There's so, anyway, it's man against the world, man against man, person against person. Please pardon that was sexist language. However, it was sexist language based on that story, and there were 2 males right there. So those are the pictures that are happening in my head. What happens after the story ends? Yeah, what happens? And again, after we read the end of that story, we should flip right back up to the beginning, and then just it's kind of a recursive process of going through that and wondering about that. But there's more opportunities this week to think about plot, characterization, conflict, setting, point of view, irony, and symbolism. Just the symbolism. Just here's a little hint toward the symbolism in Apollo. Why not name that short story, for instance, Okenwa and Raphael? Why not? Why not? Why is that not the title? Why is the title Apollo? Think about that. Really, what's really, in terms of the plot and action of that, in terms of the plot and action, what happens at the end of the story? At the end of the story, Raphael is almost burned to death for being a thief. He's at the bottom of his society's ladder. Social structure. He's at the very bottom. He's so impoverished. He's doing crimes that could literally leave to him being emulated. And maybe that's a piece of context that I'm only just sharing. No, they said they were going to spill some gasoline and they light them criminals up. There's a mob mentality in that situation. And his life was saved by the people who are going to make his life, slightly better than getting burnt to a crisp, but definitely worse than it was before he decided to leave out on that night and go do robbing. So I'm not editing, forgive me, but I get so into it. I hope that you guys are getting into it. And I was talking about that symbolism. Yeah, I was talking about that symbolism. Anyway, the heart of that symbolism's in the name of the ailment and its description in the story. It's also sort of in all of that kung fu and in the nunchucks and all of that. So it's fascinating. It really is fascinating. And again, we're all going to come to fiction at sort of different levels. If we're just reading it for the plot, that's fine. But more reading of a story is going to, literally, it's like peeling layers away. It's like an onion. I hate to do that, but I definitely think that you will benefit. Even though it's Monday, even though we got a bunch of stories to read, go back and read that story from a kind of a more enriched perspective, especially asking questions like, why so much attention to that gook around the eyes? And what's all that about? And it's fascinating. And by the way, I was in like a 300 level poetry analysis class, and there was a Philip Larkin poem. Oh gosh, it was about a kid reading comic books. I can't remember, but I remember like that sort of light bulb turning on moment when the symbolism was richly similar, and wait, what? Because I had not seen it coming, and I am not saying it out of some tact. So let's just look at our week at this juncture, and I will now be tactless. Later, maybe some other time, a different week. Okay, our Tuesday forum. Our Due Tuesday is a brief discussion from a textbook about narration. I have, of course, introduced you to many of the concepts inside there. I hope that I have done it in a way that you find easy to understand, because I have left the text to confound. No, I haven't. It's good. It's very clear text. So Due Wednesday, this is our Wednesday forum that you guys are going to be clicking into, and you will be reading 3. They're very short stories. They're like tasty little bites, and also they're for October, so they're all kind of scary and creepy, but they all sort of offer us different perspectives on point of view. So there's lots of links in the description here of this, so you'll want to be reading those. And then I have audio for each of the short stories and text, and my notion here is that you listen and read at the exact same time, especially the Poe. I think many of us have probably already been exposed to it, but the language can be difficult, so hearing it read while reading it. And A Haunted House is not the easiest story in the world either, so there. Listen and read that one. And these are some lovely readings that I found too at archive.org. So let's go back to the class, and I will do that by going like that. And I hope that you will forgive me for not editing out like these moments when I'm looking away from the camera, and I don't have time this week to make a perfectly edited video for everyone. Due Wednesday. And then our last week of the week is The Boy from Zakitos. And we're kind of introducing the concept of point of view, and or surely introducing the concept of point of view. And sometimes point of view so the Telltale Heart is super basic story, and I won't spoil it for everyone, but we have what is it, young man against old man? No, I think we have person against mental illness in that story, as in terms of the conflict, and it's all very creepy, but our narrator has problems about himself that he doesn't know about. And that, of course, and I haven't spoiled anything. If you haven't seen it or read it, it's fantastic. It's a great story. This is why Poe is still like a big deal, for that language and this incredible story where his guilt is like he's personified in the room, in this, and he's mad. He's crazy. He's crazy, and he doesn't know it. And that's the point of view through which this story is told. Now, the boy from Zakynthos, man, I feel a very similar thing happening in this story. And maybe not that our narrator is crazy, but that our narrator, there is a kind of darkness in him that he's not aware of. It's all four of these stories are super Halloween. Okay, it's a little like, this is our horror week. I didn't set it up that way, but it turns out to be convenient that it's October. I hope that during COVID we can have like the greatest Halloween ever. I don't know how. We should scare each other from a distance. So you'll notice here that I have left a very specific, in the Boy from Zakynthos forum, set of instructions that I want you to follow. It would be very easy for me to download and upload that PDF. I want you to get comfortable with searching in these library databases, because later in the class you'll be finding short stories in the library databases as well. So that's it from me for the week almost. I've only talked for 18 minutes. That's terrible. It's even more than that because, So it's week 2. We read Apollo. Now we're about to read 4 more stories, and we're sort of just moving forward into fiction. I look forward to reading your responses, and have a great week.